Okay. Well, good morning and a very warm welcome. And thank you for all for joining the session. My name is Chris Brodie. I am the chair of the Southeast Local Enterprise Partnership, which includes Essex, Kent and East Sussex. I'm also a Kent resident. I live about 20 miles back up the road from Folkestone. And therefore, I guess I have a couple of key apprehensions about the end of the transition period in 20 days' time now. The first is a physical one, whether any dislocation at the ports and the tunnel will feed back in terms of congestion to where I live. Whenever there's been Operation Stack in the past, the roads where I live have become pretty gummed up. And the second major apprehension that I have is as a business owner and manager, I depend on European supply chains, and clearly I have concerns about cost and about logistics and whether I'll actually get those supply chains to work on time in the way they have done in the past. So those are my two major apprehensions, but I'm sure there'll be other issues that you'll wish to discuss. A particular thanks to all the attendees from outside the CELEP area, and also, of course, to our panelists who have agreed to offer us their own perspectives as to what the end of the EU transition period means for them. We all heard from the Prime Minister yesterday that there is now a strong probability of an Australia-type deal, which in English I suppose means no deal. We know that there are dozens of organisations and individuals who would have liked to have spoken today and have to accept that we can only get a small proportion of views across. Nevertheless, our panelists today have very important views to communicate, and we're delighted that they can join us. Our takeaway from the conversation will be to consider our focus at CELEP over the coming 12 months. And but also in the immediate term, we have an opportunity to offer government a very clear perspective on what needs to happen next from our part of the country, which is perhaps the most affected by the end of the transition period. I'm really excited to see where the conversation takes us, and I hope that we'll be able to translate this into messages and actions that have an impact. Please submit questions relating to the panelists via the Q&A function on Zoom, and then we can pick these up later in the session. And with that, I'll hand over to my deputy chair, Sarah Dance, who will support the panelists through the next 40 minutes or so. So Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to introduce our illustrious panel and thank them very much for being part of today's discussion. I think it's going to be fascinating. Like Chris, I am actually also a Kent resident living in Folkestone, so I really do feel some of the brunt of things if things start queuing. And also as a creative, someone working in the creative sector, I also, sorry, my phone went, I'm quite concerned about what's going to happen for many of our businesses. So I too will be fascinated to hear about today. So whatever your opinion about what the vote was or about whatever the future holds, I think it's really important that we have this discussion to look at what are some of the questions that we need to feed back to government, that we can all, and the ways in which as a LEP we can work together to try and make things happen as smoothly as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to first introduce Doug Bannister, who's the Chief Executive of the Port of Dover. And you're going to talk a bit about the impact on the port and a view on the supply chain resilience, which we've just alluded to. So Doug, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So when we consider resilience in the supply chain and overall trade resilience, we look much beyond just port capacity. We've seen many ports up and down the UK now becoming congested. What we look at is the operating model, the vessels, the deployments, the frequencies, and all of this builds a profile of overall trade resilience. For the Port of Dover, we've got a short crossing, and our ferries can conduct up to 5 round voyages in a single day. That makes them hugely productive assets. Equally, because of the frequency, if you miss a sailing, there's another one coming around right behind it. So for the supply chains, it makes certain that that constant rhythm can carry on. Also, with our accompanied driver lorry model, we have tremendous resilience in that. Many ports will have an inbound dwell time of say 4 hours if it's quick, maybe 4 days or longer, even if it's a bit longer. In Dover, our average inbound dwell time is just 5 minutes. And what that means is as soon as the ramp is down on the ferry, the cargo's out hitting the market. Now, I'm not saying that Dover is the only port. At times, I think it might be, but I'm not saying that Dover is the only port, because every port up and down the nation's got a critical role to play. And we've all lifted as the sector, certainly during the coronavirus pandemic, to make certain that the essential goods are making it into the nation. Now, the other important thing about Dover is we've got a track record of managing through disruption, where we can really effectively deal with the challenges in front of us and then clear the backlog and get the traffic moving again. My illustration of that is back in September, there was a nationwide security operation where everything leaving this country through all gateways was subject to increased search and selection. Now, clearly that affected Dover quite heavily. At that point in time, we implemented Operation Stack. We had about 4,500 lorries stuck. Now, in the government's reasonable worst case scenario, that's 7,000, 7,500. So we're getting of that level. The security operation ended. Within 12 hours, we'd cleared that backlog and we got back to normal operations. It is a tremendously resilient business. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Doug. Very interesting to hear. So I'm going to also now hand over to Trevor Scott, who's the Managing Director of Samarco Logistics. And you're going to talk a little bit about the view from the European logistics sector and the long-term planning and the preparedness that you've been undertaking.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You know, for me, I break this down into export, imports, and essentially what the major concerns are for our industry. So if I look at the exporters, we've been engaging with lots of customers now, and the good news is, in particular, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen a high level of engagement, in particular at board level, you know, trying to understand the complexities of what they're going to be entering into. So if we look at, say, commercial paperwork, which the government have been talking about, I think from a paperwork compliance point of view, I think it's getting there. And I'm fairly confident that, you know, companies understand what the new normal looks like. Where some of the issues still lie is on the commercial terms, what we call Incoterms. So who's paying for what? So from an export point of view, you know, who's going to be paying for import clearances? Who's paying for duties? There still seems to be some not much clarity on that, because obviously that's a big change. And the biggest issue that we see is import VAT in the EU. So, you know, there's not one regime for the EU on VAT. There's 27 different regimes. So every country of destination, there has to be a collection of import VAT. So, you know, once the goods get through Dover, we see delays actually in all the countries within the EU until that settles down in terms of the collection of VAT and how that's going to run. If we look at costs, the reality is the cost for shipping now will be on a clearance, will be export import, will be average between £50 and £100 per shipment. So that will be for one pallet or one full load. So, you know, SMEs have to bear that in mind in particular. Duty in a no-deal situation can be anywhere between 2 to 12% for clothing. You know, there's some products that are 50%. So again, extra cost there. And then also as well in the country of destination, there's a use of deferment account. So depending on the trade, what we're finding in a lot of customers in the UK are actually going to ship on a delivered basis because they need to stay competitive. So all them costs for duties, clearances are going to come back to them in the UK. And there's fees for use of deferment account. So, you know, these are reality costs that are going to come in. In terms of imports, I'm not as concerned really because the government are in control of their own destiny. We've got 6 months postponed on VAT, which is good. You know, light checks at borders. But again, in a no-deal situation in particular, them goods will be held up at warehouses like us that are customs cleared, bonded, approved. But we cannot let cargo go until the duty is collected because it's a massive liability on our industry. And just really, you know, what's our major concerns? There's no clarity on Northern Ireland, no clarity whatsoever still with less than 3 weeks to go, you know, huge parts of our business. And I was speaking to the Director General of BIFA, which is the British International Freight Association. You know, we summarised it as this, and I'll read this to you. So with less than a month to go at the end of the transition period, BIFA members are still waiting for the government to provide a complete information and clarity on the processes by which cross-border trade will be conducted at the end of the year. the systems that underpin those processes and assurance that those systems, which have yet to be tested, will actually work and be able to do what's necessary. So as an industry, as a freight forwarder, as an intermediary, we've done as much as we possibly can. I've employed 25 new people for customs. They have not still used any system that is going to go live. They have not had the opportunity to test anything. And we are going to go going live on the 1st of January without any tests whatsoever within the whole industry. And yeah, that is the concern for us, but we'll get through it, as they say. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. We'll come to the discussion about some of this in a bit, but if I can hand over now to Dr. Charles Trotman, who works for the Country Land and Business Association. Charles.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we've got to a situation that 4.5 years later, since the vote in June 2016, we're at a point where we still don't know what's going to happen. We've only got less than 3 weeks to go before we formally leave the European Union after transition. I think it's also important to realise that because the UK will come out of the single market, the rules will substantially change whether we have a deal or not, and that will have a major impact on those who work in the rural economy, whether they be tourism businesses, farmers, landowners, and manufacturers. The impact is going to be substantial, it's going to be significant. And there are three main issues as far as we're concerned. The first is a food supply chain. When COVID-19 has already shown that if you have disruption in the supply chains because it's just in time, it causes immense pain, it causes immense difficulties. Those difficulties will increase because of Brexit, because we still don't know really what's going to happen when we hit the 1st of January next year. The rules are out there, but the rules are complex. They need to be understood. And what's clear from surveying our members and surveying those who work in the Southeast, it's clear that they're not ready for Brexit because they're focusing so much on COVID-19 and the pandemic, quite rightly so. I think the second point is labour supply. We have a major problem, particularly in the Celeb area, that we have a lot of migrant labour coming into the area, and a lot of businesses rely on that labour. We know that through COVID-19, we had a major shortage of supply. Next year, 2022, 23, even up to 2025, that labour supply will be constrained because we don't have access to a migrant labour force. That's going to have a major impact as well. And then finally, when you bring everything together, so we've got COVID-19, we've got Brexit, and in terms of agriculture, we've got major policy change where the actual direct payments that farmers receive, they're being dismantled. So farmers are under increasing pressure, what we call the triple whammy, that if we can't get this right, and it will take time, then what you're going to see are a number of farmers not only under pressure, but they will be going out of business. And that's a situation that seriously concerns us at the CLA, but also will concern all businesses in the Celeb area. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Charles. I'd like to now hand over to Councillor Bartlett, who leads the Keep Dover Clear, and hear your views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. The message, as Sarah has just said, I want to make to you all is to very much keep Dover clear. It's so important, not only for us as a council, but for our residents in our district. It affects their everyday lives. What will help is additional local traffic control powers and traffic cameras locally, including work on the A2, the A256 and the A20. And what will help us to improve this is the visibility on our roundabouts, even doing simple things like the overgrown shrubs, and work to prevent accidents on our hotspots at the key roundabouts. Making any improvements to the Duke of York and the Whitfield roundabouts and the A256 junction is hugely important. It's vital that work is done on improving the M2 and the A2, I know these are not quick fix things, but I was reassured to hear in early November, the Prime Minister actually acknowledged work will start on improvements to dualling of the A2. But of course, no timescale was given to us. It concerns us greatly. We are working together, of course, with our local MP, KCC, and obviously the Port of Dover. We need to keep Dover clear. I don't want you all to feel that this is what we're always banging on about all the time, but obviously it just concerns us greatly. If the work isn't done, then that's going to affect our housing plan that we have. Houses are to be built at Whitfield. They're already congested on the roads as well at the moment. So it's such a long outstanding concern for Dover, especially with all the trading that is done at the port with UK PLC. We need to be ready to work with everybody to command and control, work together and make sure we are engaged. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. I'd now like to hand over to Councillor Gough, Roger Gough, who's leader of Kent County Council, and he's going to talk a little bit about the preparations Pan County. Thank you, Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. Clearly in all this, there's a little bit of a sense of deja vu all over again, because as the county which has been very much at the centre of preparations for Brexit, no potential no deal, end of transition, may now be end of transition and no deal. We have been up and down this particular hill several times, along with our partners with whom we work locally in the Kent Resilience Forum, above all to try to ensure that for Kent, and I think this then has knock-on effects for the wider region, we can keep traffic moving, we can ensure that business can continue, and that both residents and businesses can go about their lives without significant disruption after the changes on 31st of December, 1st of January. And I think as has been indicated, the initial focus will be very much on goods going for export, because that's where the checks will take place, and the immediate aftermath of that will be if some months down the track from that, in July, we will of course then have the import controls coming in after that. So 3 levels of, if you like, defense on this. The first is trader or haulier readiness. And clearly I listened with a lot of interest to what Trevor was saying about that. And it's, I think, an area on which it's very much outside our control. It's a matter which government has sought to lead on, particularly since the development of things like the border operating model in July. And I think we have seen quite a lot of progress on that, although exactly how it all plays out is something on which others are perhaps better equipped to judge than I. But it certainly remains an area of potential uncertainty. The second, again, tying into what other speakers, perhaps particularly Trevor, have touched on, is what then happens with the systems to support this. And you'll recall that the government has brought in the somewhat clunkily named Check and HGV is ready to cross the border system, which is, we believe, is going to be up running and having been tested, up and running, I think, in the course of next week, which again is taking just in time to a particular sort of level. But that, again, if that system works, and with it the so-called Kent Access Permit, then many of the issues for us in terms of the third line of defense, traffic management, comes to matter, or should be less necessary to rely on. But if any of these elements don't work, if we do then find that we have to bring these plans into being because traffic congestion is starting to build, then this is the side on which the Kent Resilience Forum and the County Council and other partners play a central role. This is the so-called Operation Fennel, designed to ensure that by a series of steps, a series of escalated steps, we can manage with some 7,000 HGVs being held across Kent. And each of those kicking in firstly along essentially the M20, including the development of the new inland border facility at Sevington near Ashford, just off Junction 10A, And then perhaps the more challenging bit, which is when it all links, when HGVs are then sent north into Thanet for Manston, the Manston Airport side. As I say, a huge amount of work has been done on that. We had been working on similar schemes for previous iterations of the Brexit dilemma. However, I think what has been interesting has been to see the underlying conditions, how those have been, the areas particularly of government activity, how those have been brought forward in the second half of the year. And part of our role has been to constantly nag, challenge, and raise questions as to what will happen when. Well, a lot has. We've seen, for instance, special development orders on the sites that are required. We've seen sites such as Sevington brought forward, purchased by the Department for Transport in the summer, actually brought forward under our supervision at the moment. But nonetheless, there are still outstanding issues which remain. And if I could pick out one in particular, and it's one that we constantly raise, it is what will happen if we get through the level of those 7,000 HGVs. As Doug mentioned, it was possible on one occasion to stack up 4,500 pretty quickly. If we get to the point of 7,000 and beyond, do those vehicles keep coming into Kent? Do we at that point then have to trigger Operation Stack? Government clearly has a range of facilities further up in the country, but how effectively will those be used, and will the vehicles keep coming? As I say, our focus above all else is to ensure that we do have traffic continuing to move, that businesses are able to continue their operation. And our focus throughout this has also been on the fact that this is needed, deal or no deal. As Charles mentioned in one of his key points, there are many areas of business for which the scale of change already, even with a deal, the regime change taking place in our trade with our biggest trading partner, that's happening anyway. And that is what we've all had to adjust to. But in either case, I think we have made those preparations. Certainly at a local level, we feel that they are strong, but the external environment, how that will all be delivered on time, effectively, on and in the weeks after 1st of January, I think remains a little uncertain. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. We've talked a fair bit about sort of the impact in certain specific areas like Kent. So it's quite nice now to talk to Anna, who's representing the Sussex Chamber of Commerce. And you're going to talk a little bit, Anna, about how you've been supporting the businesses and helping them export. Anna.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, so the Sussex Chamber is part of one of 53 chambers nationally through the British Chambers. So we represent 80,000 businesses nationally. And we also have links with 56 chambers overseas. So the chambers have been processing export documentation for many years. And we've been seen as trusted by government and businesses to certify certificates of origin and preferential trade documents. And every year we handle thousands of documents to ensure goods can enter countries with minimal delays and costs. We have been liaising with HMRC over the last 2 years with regards to customs declarations and the requirements needed. Now, declarations are estimated to increase from 55 million to 300 million for businesses that import and export. And businesses will need to comply with the rules to make sure that the declarations comply with the duty and VAT requirements. So the Chamber Network set up Chamber Customs to ensure that we can train staff and process the customs declarations that will be needed regardless of whether there's a deal or no deal. We've trained over 200 staff as customs agents, and we will be working with logistics and freight forwarders as we have always done. However, the country requires approximately another 20,000 more staff to be customs trained to deal with the demand. As was previously mentioned by Trevor, which we haven't even been able to use the live system at the moment. So businesses have been undergoing customs training, utilising the HMRC grants which are available. And we've seen a huge increase literally in the last month of businesses utilising the training, whether it's trade compliance, export controls, becoming an authorised economic operator, as well as the customs training. Some 3 years ago, the British Chambers developed a guidance dashboard, which was presented to government with numerous unanswered questions. That document was literally updated a few days ago, and there's still many items on there that are either red or amber. Red indicating that there's inadequate information for business to plan. For example, food and drink labelling issues exist. There's the dispute resolution with another EU country, and the form of resolution and means of redress. Businesses don't know how to go about this. The rules of origin, if there's no deal between the UK and trading partner, the rules of origin will not be applicable. There's also issues about GDPR and whether businesses will be able to continue to hold and transfer data and personal information. Industrial standards and whether companies will need to comply. What will companies need to comply with in the future, and whether the UK will have a seat at the table to influence European standards, as is currently the case. UK quotas, how to apply for UK quotas and how they are going to be administered. There's no official guidance on tariff rate quotas. And there's also not been discussions regarding the services businesses and what rules will apply to them. These areas are rated the highest levels of risk. So I've mentioned some of those, but there's also the IT systems, which some of them won't be live until middle of next year, the infrastructure, the data, the customs agents' capacity. There is a lack of capacity at the moment, and the trader and haulier readiness. So there's still lots of uncertainty and inability for businesses to prepare fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to hear from you all, and it's really, noticeable how much work both the businesses and the local authorities and all of the partnerships have been undertaking to try to deal with what is a very difficult and uncertain situation. There's obviously a huge amount of work still going on all the time on this. We're now open to a bit of a discussion between us all about things, so please do input. But maybe I'll kick off first with a question to you all, but actually I'm going to look to Trevor first with this question. So is there anything as a LEP that we should be asking the government to do in the next few weeks to help if there is no deal, or if there is an Australian type deal?
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, to be honest, I just echo what Anna said, really. It's the systems. We need clarity on the systems and be able to have them ready and enabled. I suppose the other thing that we could look at potentially is lobbying in terms of the checks on the other side, in the French side. But again, that becomes a very political conversation because, if they put the borders down from day one, that's their choice. We're deciding not to do that. We're going to be light touch. So from an import point of view, goods will continue to flow through. But yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to say at this last minute what they could actually change. And it's really disappointing that we're in this situation. That's all I can summarise as.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Trevor. At this point, I think for the CELEP to be making, positions about, where all these unanswered questions still need to be answered is really important. But for me, I wouldn't isolate it to just the next couple of weeks. A very high probability in the opening couple of weeks of January, we're not going to witness much challenge. And that's primarily because we're going through a massive stock build at the moment in preparation for it. We're wickedly busy now. But I think that, and I'm very confident that British businesses will adapt very swiftly as the new information comes in and what's required of them. And I think the CELEP has got a fantastic role to play in keeping all the businesses across the region up to speed with as new things are coming out, as new decisions are being made, so that they can all try and keep their businesses running in the best way that they possibly can. So I see a key role for CELIP actually during the first quarter of next year.
Thank you, Doug. Chris.
Also, Sarah, if I may, just to build on what Doug was saying, I think that we also have a key role in alerting government to where the real problems are occurring. We don't really know at this stage where the real problems are going to be. There's a whole range of issues that we've identified, but where is the shoe really going to pinch? And I think that what we should be doing is, over the course of the first quarter and the second quarter, is keeping really close contact with the panel, this panel, and indeed other businesses, just to identify those areas which where there are real problems, and suggest solutions to government as to how those quick solutions to try and unblock any particular problem. I think that's the key role that we can have going forward. And I would suggest that we should be doing these sorts of panels on a fairly regular basis certainly throughout the first half of 2021.
Thank you. And sorry, Charles, go on.
Yeah, can I just, I think Chris is right. I think you've got to realise that all wisdom doesn't stay within government. It's important that businesses such as you have in the panel and all the businesses in the CELIP area actually begin to actually push the points that you want to make to government officials. I think you've also got to bear in mind that over the last, well, since March 2020, they've been dealing with COVID-19. Brexit's just come up on the horizon, and they've suddenly begun to realise they've got a major problem on their hands. It will take time, but government officials will actually take advice if it's presented in a coherent and clear manner.
Thank you, Charles. So talking about the how we talk to government and how we help them to listen to us, and I'm just interested to know about the role that the Chambers of Commerce have been playing in those conversations with government. I mean, I presume that you have been talking to government quite a lot about many of these concerns. It's a simple question: are they listening?
They've started to take note of our Brexit guidance dashboard, but it's been really frustrating because this was actually given to them about 3 years ago, and there's been little progress made on the issues and the concerns that came out from business in terms of answers that were really needed, because of course there were all the discussions about possible Brexit leaving last year, and we were pushing the Brexit guidance dashboard. The Director General, Adam Marshall, is in constant communication with the Prime Minister and other senior ministers. And I'm also communicating with local MPs and making sure that they're fully aware of the updates. But there's still so many little things that are unanswered. One of the items that I mentioned about the food and drink labelling, I mean, that impacts a lot of our industry here because of the vineyards, the food manufacturers, and you know, they're not clear in terms of the rules when it comes to labelling their products. So it's just making sure that these little things do get addressed. And I know that it will be just constantly communicating this. We may see hold-ups. We may see that. We have seen businesses that have been stockpiling. We saw that last year, and we started to see it again as a way of them dealing with the transition period until things start to I suppose, become clearer.
Thank you. I noticed, I think it was in the paper today, that there's sort of 30% more lorries on the road at the moment. They're suggesting. So I just wondered, maybe Doug and indeed Trevor and Councillor Gough, about the impact of that on your businesses, and whether that also kind of gives an indication of the level of traffic that we might be anticipating. And then also wanted to touch on something that Councillor Gough mentioned earlier on, which is the 7,000 lorries. Once you get to 7,000, what's going to happen then? Are we going to close the borders of Kent? And then what will be the impact on the wider impact across the other bits of the LEP area? So if I can ask Doug first, in terms of that kind of the impact of the 30% more traffic, at the moment and what you think might be happening in the future?
Thank you, Sarah. We are really, really busy. We're doing 10,000 lorries in a day, every day, and this is set to continue for the next couple of weeks. Now, I think that that's also a very, very good hallmark around what businesses are doing. They're taking some prudent measures on being able to prepare for this. Our ferries are sailing full. We're clearing the backlog. We as you know, certainly local residents, if not wider across Kent, you know that we've had our A20 tap in place for pretty consistently now for the last week or so, and that's set to carry on. And I think one of the big benefits, first of all, there's no doubt that we have a geographic advantage. We are the closest point to the largest trading partner. But also the other advantage that we have is we've got dual modes. So we've got the ferries that go and the rail that goes as well. And this just is sort of Britain's, super duper wicked, fast, accelerated supply chain. And it just, keeps running. The key thing for us is around the fluidity. And, we've been working really hard with government, with colleagues across Kent to make certain that everything that we can do just keeps things moving. It might slow down a bit, but just keep it moving.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're in the same position as what Doug's saying. We're absolutely busy. It's December. It's not December by now. Everything's normally into the DCs, retail for Christmas. It's normally done by now, and we're sort of running down. We see massive demand at the moment. However, we are now seeing a shortage of hauliers. Hauliers are deciding not to come back on them return legs back to the UK. They're realigning their trucks to stay in the EU and wait until the new year. As Doug touched on earlier, we see January will be really subdued. So the pinch points potentially could be coming sort of February and March as the new norm sort of kicks in. And just touching on, how do we prevent this and how can traders be ready? I think our industry, freight forwarding and logistics in European, we have to be really, really strict with exporters as well in particular. We have to become more professional. For us as a business, we will not collect anything going forward from the 1st of January unless the paperwork has been submitted, it's been authorised. No different to now if someone's exporting to the US or China or South Africa. So we have to approach it in that way and become more professional. And I think if the industry becomes more professional and a bit more stricter, then that will reduce the congestions at Dover and trucks being stopped for checks, etc. So, I think the industry has a big part to play in this as well.
Thank you. Roger and then Anna.
Thank you. Yes, I think we've all observed the heightened activity that Doug and Trevor were both describing, and that's clearly brought added to some of the pressures, some of the challenge of maintaining that level of fluidity. It will be interesting, and I think I think there was a time not so long ago. I think we all said, yeah, January the 1st will be pretty quiet. That's it's a relatively subdued time of year, etc., etc. But wait a week or two in, and that's when the pressures will build. Now, it may be to the degree that, as you said, there's been a lot of stock building activity. Then that extra pressure may come that little bit later. To what extent that helps in the sense that problems over where hauliers and traders are not prepared, that those can be to some extent dealt with in a slightly less congested environment, I don't know. Maybe it will help. But either way, I think for most of us, the expectation would be, yes, the absolute focus has got to be on maintaining fluidity. And I know that's a great concern on both sides of the channel, because we have been working very hard on our relationships with our counterparts in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And that is something which comes across very strongly from them. It would be surprising, given the number of uncertainties, the capacity for something at some stage to go wrong, not to see some quite significant challenges at particular points. But as I say, I think one of my bigger concerns remains the point I mentioned at the end of my remarks. Do we get to a point when things fill up in Kent and the vehicles still keep coming? That's, I think, the biggest concern.
And do you have a view, Roger, about what Councillor Gough, about what you would do as a local authority in that situation?
Well, I think in those circumstances, there would come a point when it would be back to Operation Stack, which is absolutely what we don't want. And that's, we're at the moment in that, because, relatively recently, including the operation that I think Doug mentioned, Operation Stack gets triggered. Now, we are in the movement between that and all the new traffic management systems, so that if you do get problems, at a certain point, you'd rely on M20 contraflow and various other such moves rather than Stack. The problem is, and we know historically in Kent, it doesn't take very much to get us into that sort of territory. We didn't need Brexit to be a thing, to have had historically some problems of that kind. But clearly the worry would be, if you got yourself back into that territory, if the vehicles, as they kept coming, I don't think there's much else that could be done, and that would be a profoundly retrograde step.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. Just to pick up on a couple of points there. One is we've started to see a shortage globally of containers. A lot of businesses are really struggling to get hold of containers, but also wooden pallets, which now have to be treated and have a certificate and everything to import and export goods. But just to pick up on the point of the congestion, as part of the Sussex Resilience Forum, we've got to think of the smaller ports as well, because the smaller ports, for example, in Sussex, the Newhaven and Shoreham, if they're going to, heavy goods vehicles are going to turn up and they haven't got the necessary paperwork, they will be turned round and sent to Kent, to Clackett Lane. So we've got to think of the congestion this will add onto the A and B roads, and vehicles then being sent from smaller ports and smaller areas to Kent, and that the potential congestion that could add.
Thank you. And of course, that then has an impact, doesn't it, on all of our rural businesses. And Charles, you alluded to that earlier on, but I think it would just be interesting to hear your view about some of that, because that, many of our rural businesses are businesses who've already suffered significantly during COVID, particularly I'm thinking of the hospitality and the tourism sector. So I just wondered what you were think about that.
Well, I think Anna's point about Newhaven and vehicles going from Newhaven to Kent is clearly correct. It's also extremely worrying because it's going to snarl up the supply chains completely. I think the other point to make is that we don't have the infrastructure in place. If we can't have the supply chains working as they need to, then it's going to have a major impact on those who grow and those who manage the land, and also on the tourism sector as well. And hospitality in the Sellup area is significant, to say the least. And we know what the impact has been through COVID, and we can't see that impact getting any less. So we're going to enter a situation, certainly over the next 12 months, where it's going to be, we have to manage expectations. We need to be in a position where all those who work in the rural economy, all those who live in rural communities, understand what is likely to happen over the next 12 months. It will be, it will evolve over time. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months. We do know, however, that the European member state, or the member states in the EU, already have their contingency plans in the event of a no deal ready. France has had these ready for the last 2 years. My question to the UK government is, why are we in this situation now? We've got less than 3 weeks to go, and we're clearly not ready. On Anna's point about food labelling, the rules are actually now out. They do know, producers need to know what the rules are. The problem we've got is that either they're not listening to the messages that we're putting out there, and it's not just in rural economy, agriculture, whatever, it's in all business. Either they're not ready and they're not listening, or the messaging is not clear enough. We've had this with COVID-19. We're going to repeat the exercise clearly with Brexit. evolutionary process, but it needs to be managed, and it needs to be managed far more clearly than COVID was. COVID gave us a case study. Let's learn the lessons from the mistakes we've made over COVID.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, all of this absolutely impacts on people. And I'm thinking now, particularly when I look at Councillor Bartlett, this all impacts on individuals in communities. And we're not just talking about Dover, we're talking about the whole of the LEP area. And of course, if there's congestion on all of our roads, that will have an impact on everybody's business, no matter what business you're in. So Councillor Bartlett, just I'm going to hand over to questions in a minute from the public, but I just wondered whether there was anything you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Only that, echo what I said earlier, how concerned we are on that issue and the impact it will have on everybody. And like Charles has just said, we're 3 weeks away. We've not seen any improvements to any of the roads in Dover. And how many years have they been talking about dueling the A2? I mean, we really need to accelerate this now. I know, not saying, Sarah, that's something that you can do, but obviously our MP needs to push this further. And the impact on the roundabouts, as I highlighted earlier, they're already hotspots now. I dread to think what will happen, and that will then have an impact on all the local businesses. And this is something that we really need to prevent happening. Thank you, Sarah.
When I tell people, as I do from time to time, that the world's second busiest roll-on roll-off port, the busiest roll-on roll-off port in Europe, and the first 8 miles of connectivity is a single track road, people can't believe it. How can the the 5th or 6th richest OECD country in the world allow the first 8 miles of connectivity from that level of busyness persist? People just think they don't believe me. If I speak to my counterparts in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, they find that it's unbelievable.
Thank you. I'm keen now that our audience get a chance to ask some questions of you all. So I'm going to hand over now to our very brilliant Chief Executive of the LEP, Adam, who's going to field some of those questions. So thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Sarah. I don't think I've been introduced like that before, but I'll take that one. We've had a few really interesting questions, and obviously this is a really important input into this discussion. Looking at things from very different angles. So apologies to anybody whose questions we missed, because I don't think we'll be able to take all of them, but I'll pick out a few very different ones. The first one I think I'll target, with apologies in advance, to Doug. It's a very good question about the relationships that you have with other ports or otherwise, Doug. So the question is simply that. So what relationships do you have with other ports, and will you be able to cooperate if necessary?
That's a great question. So I've got 3 responses to that. Response one of the gateways that we collaborate with the most is Eurotunnel. We're faced with very similar challenges, and we lobby for the same things towards government. We've got the same pressures, the same drivers, that sort of stuff. Beyond that, we do. I mean, the port sector in the UK is a fairly tight community, as you'd expect. And through organizations like the British Ports Association and the UK Major Ports Group, we tend to be all aligned pretty much on maritime related things. Now, that's not to say that we don't compete, because we do compete. But in terms of trying to make certain that the overall system works is part of that dialogue that takes place. And for me to pick up a phone to my counterpart up in Harwich or Bristol or whatever, that that can happen on a daily basis. It's pretty fluid. Now, the final thing I'd say is our main constraint in Dover is not the land that we have, because we pump a lot of stuff across our land. It's not the check-in facilities, it's not the border authorities, it's actually the ferry capacity. That was proven by an independent research done by Drury back in February 19. Now, government's gone out and secured some critical freight contracts with a number of ferry companies, not a single one of which is via Dover. They're all via other ports. When actually the answer probably is put more ferries into Dover, because that'll allow us, that's where the cargo wants to flow, and that'll allow us to keep everything moving much more swiftly. I don't know, CELIP colleagues, whether you can ask government to put it in other contracts, but certainly we'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Doug. I've got a question now, which I guess has got a different spin on the conversation to the one that we've run through in the last 20 minutes or so, and that is, what do you see as the most significant potential opportunities that might come out of the end of the EU transition period? Not sure who to aim that one at first. I might look at you, Anna, and then for anybody else to chip in.
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, because it's the unknown at the moment, but there are opportunities in terms of once all the systems and the processes are in place and people know what the requirements are, there's opportunities to trade more with European countries, for the imports and exports, for us to really showcase British business globally as well as across the EU. I think there's it's an opportunity for British businesses to really get their brand out into Europe, and to help businesses grow as well, because the pandemic has really hampered business and everything. So if anything, I do see growth opportunities. I think we will only know that once we know whether there's a deal, no deal, and once all the systems are in place and people fully know what the requirements are. But yes, I see great growth in the future, and for British business.
Thank you, Anna. Doug?
Sorry, looking for the mute button. Sorry about that. Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, for Dover, we are adjacent to the world's busiest shipping lane. We've got a brand new state-of-the-art cargo facility. We're getting increased inquiries for more business coming in across those docks by doing that. And that's global enterprise. The final thing I'd say is we're pursuing a bid for a Freeport status down here in Kent. Now, the big thing about Freeport is creating a landing zone for inward international investment, for creating more facilities, more activity, and more jobs within that Freeport area. We're hugely excited about that.
Thank you, Doug. Did anybody else want to come in on that particular question? Charles?
Yeah, I think if we get this right, certainly for landowners and for other rural businesses, it will allow them to diversify. And what we've seen is farmers, for example, who diversify, they tend to get a greater income from diversification than they do from the main farming operation itself. It also leads to far greater economies of scale, because you will see farmers or farm businesses changing from farm production into other things. You'll see greater or larger land holdings, and with a larger land holding economically, they become more efficient, or they should become more efficient and become more effective. So that is an opportunity, in a sense, from Brexit.
Thanks, Charles. Anna, I think you were looking to come back in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well, in terms of, I know that the pandemic has brought about huge redundancies in predominantly the aviation, hospitality, tourism sectors, and creative as well. But there are opportunities to reskill people in industries that we've seen a growth in: logistics, freight forwarding, in the warehousing, in the customs declaration side as well. So there are opportunities to reskill local talent and to make sure that they're fulfilling the roles that are really needed.
Thanks, Anna. And it takes me into probably the last question on here that I'll have the opportunity to ask, and that's really about sectors. And actually the question's posed along the lines of, which sectors do you see being negatively impacted the hardest following the end of the transition period? But I suppose in that also there are sectors that might have an opportunity there as well. And apologies to go to you again, but it kind of feeds on from the last comment you made. How do you see that looking, certainly in your patch, the impact on sectors?
So at the moment, it will really depend on, the impact, as I mentioned, the freight forwarding, logistics companies, we've already seen huge growth, but there's also opportunities in the digital marketing. So that we see, and services, the services industry growing. The ones that have been negatively impacted are, I suppose, the ones that have also been hit by the pandemic, because they're going to struggle, and it's going to take a long time before we see people traveling for holidays. You know, we see the hospitality sector picking up. Food and drink sectors, you know, we've got huge growth in the vineyards and in food and drink in the UK, which is growing trend, because now our wines are on par with other European countries. So there are some negatives and positives, but I think you can look at how we can reskill and position business in a different way. I think digital technology has played a huge part during the lockdown. And I think we'll see lots of businesses adapting digital technology processes and using that a lot more. And we'll see a growth in that area rather than in some of the other industries that have really been affected through COVID.
Thanks, Anna. Trevor, I think you were looking to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. You know, from my side, what I see, the UK has potentially been a gateway to the EU for a lot of companies that actually do not manufacture. So, you know, maybe Far East, bringing it in, consolidating, and then pushing it out to the EU. A lot of them companies have moved, and we've actually moved with them into Holland and Belgium. So, but the positive, what I see is the manufacturers that we talk to, you know, they're not moving, they're staying in the UK. They have got their product, it's made in the UK. So, as you say, I think it's not all negative, but the whole point of this EU gateway for the UK will disappear. So there are opportunities there. And just picking up on Anna's point as well, just quickly, just on the professionalism of the industry as well, the logistics industry, there's a massive opportunity there to make that an actual skill. Logistics degrees, I know they're coming more prominent now, but if we look at our German counterparts, you know, that it is a trade and a profession. And I think that will really enhance what we do and, you know, give opportunities there in terms of the sort of unemployment from the COVID.
Trevor, thanks very much. I think we'll wrap it up there. So the key takeaways that I'm taking from this are that actually businesses are trying their best. Clearly, this is a challenging situation and not helped because of the lack of some really critical information from government. I think, therefore, it's from our side, from CELEP, given that we are a partnership, an enterprise partnership between business, higher education, further education, and local authorities, I think CELEP actually can actually play a key part in delivering messages back to government. We did that during the COVID, well, we have been doing it during the COVID crisis. We've hosted about 5 or 6 roundtables where ministers have actually participated. And I think what we should be suggesting to ministers is that we hold a series of roundtables again throughout the first half of 2021 to be able to feed back to them where from this sort of forum, from local authorities, from business, from higher education, where the real issues are and what we see as these quick solutions that are necessary to unblock particular problems. I think we should learn from what we've been doing in the COVID crisis and replicate that for this, because this is could be another area where we are uniquely positioned to feed key messages back to ministers. And I think we should insist that, as we did with COVID, that ministers host those roundtables for them, the relevant ones, for them to hear from the issues that are actually on the ground, from Dover, from Kent, from businesses, from the ports. These are absolutely key, I think, to getting through these quite significant challenges, but also, as we've also heard, opportunities too. So thanks so much, everybody. I felt that was a really good session, and we will be repeating this, I think, at fairly regular intervals during the first half of 21, so that we can give those messages back to ministers. Thanks very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.